The Simpsons franchise has created some of the most cult-followed video games. The first game that comes to mind for me is the Simpsons Arcade back in 1991. Then later in the early 2000s with the Simpsons Game, Road Rage, and Hit and Run. Let's break down why the franchise hasn't been licensing out games in the past decade, the canceled Hit and Run 2, and the remastered rumors. As always, links to all the sources will be posted in the description, so make sure to check those out and support those writers. And with that out of the way, let's get into the Simpsons Hit and Run Remaster. Radical Entertainment is the developer behind Simpsons Road Rage in 2001 and later Simpsons Hit and Run in 2003. The developer was most known for working on licensed games during the PlayStation 2 and Xbox 360 era, but in 2009 the studio ventured into new territory with their Prototype franchise. The first game was well received and sold moderately well, but with the release of Prototype 2 and its eventual failure, Activision announced a quote significant reduction in staff and the studio ceased development on original games. Now, I will say it would not have been likely for Radical Entertainment to get to work on a remaster of Hit and Run or a sequel anyways, because EA still has exclusive rights to the Simpsons license, which EA has had since 2005, while Radical Entertainment eventually went on to become part of Activision. So crossing those streams and most likely getting the work would have not been likely anytime soon. And it also looks like EA is not going to give up the Simpsons rights anytime soon either. Now I will give EA credit. When they first got the license and back in 2007, they did release a full single player Simpsons game called The Simpsons Game. Now, the game was created to coincide with the release of the Simpsons movie. The game was received well to moderate by fans and critics, and the game was a commercial success as well for selling 4 million copies in 4 months. A sequel was planned in 2011, but was cancelled by EA early in development. And the only other real use of the Simpsons license since then has been the mobile game The Simpsons Tapped Out, which has been a massive success for EA, and the game's revenue has passed $100 million in the first year post-release, which must make it very hard for EA to justify making any full console Simpsons games when the cost to develop has only gotten higher since the original Hit and Run. Writing a story is always a big factor. For the first game, they even had all of the voice actors make an appearance and voice their characters, which gets very expensive. And even if the game sold amazing, it still would not reach the same margins as Tapped Out. Tapped Out is also a game as a service, so they can continue to update the game and make money year over year, which is harder to do for a full console release. Now, if EA wants to go the route of a sequel and add their normal microtransactions and ruin the game with these mechanics, then I would rather not have them make a game at all or just do a remaster. I only want something new from this franchise if EA doesn't do their usual EA tactics, because I don't want the memories of this franchise and series to be ruined over microtransactions and excessive spending. Now, that doesn't mean that a sequel or remaster is impossible. EA used the Star Wars franchise to make 2 microtransaction heavy Battlefront games, which were more similar to games as a service and did very well for EA. But late last year, EA did release Jedi Fallen Order, which is a true single-player experience set in the Star Wars universe. So it is possible we could see something like this for The Simpsons. EA has made mountains of money from the mobile game, and they could reinvest some of that money into developing a remaster or sequel to one of their Simpsons properties. Moving on to the news, fans got themselves worked up when it was announced that the producers and writers of The Simpsons were attending E3. And speculation was that a new Simpsons game would finally be announced, or maybe a remaster to a previous game. But we didn't get that, and instead they announced an update for Tapped Out, which was not received well by the community. Now, moving on to some other news, in late 2019, the LAD Bible interviewed a producer of Simpsons Hit and Run, Vlad Seraldi, and he mentioned he thinks it's time for the series to be remastered or remade. He said, quote, "I could see it on multiple different types of platforms as a remake or remaster. It would have to take the parties who are in charge of the property, EA, to want that to happen, and someone out there to decide they were going to go out and do it. But absolutely, it would be fun to explore these characters and that universe again, that work again." He also gave an explanation as to why he thinks the game was such a hit initially. He said, quote, "As far as why it stood the test of time, I think that it's a game that kids could play, adults could play, anyone who was fans of the show could try and laugh and have fun with. When you make something, sometimes you know you've made something special. This was one of those ones that we knew we hit the mark. We didn't know it was going to sell as well as it did. We had high hopes, but it definitely hit its expectations." Now, this is exciting to hear from a producer because it sounds like he actually understood why people liked the game, which a lot of times producers really don't know, or people just think they've struck lightning and it was a random occurrence and really don't get why fans are so passionate and hold on to these games. But it sounds like Vlad really understands why the game was so special and why it's still a topic of discussion all these years later. Now, in January of 2020, just a few months later, the conversation continued from an interview with Game Media, where they were able to interview the senior game designer on Hit and Run, Joe McGinn. And when asked about a remake or a remaster, he said, quote, "Of course, I would love to have it myself on my Nintendo Switch. Having said that, the PC version, if you can find it, not only works on modern versions of Windows, it is compatible with some pretty amazing mods. If it is a remaster, I'm all about the frame rate. Don't change the art style, it's pretty authentic to the show, but give me 60 frames per second. I think games just look and feel better that way." He continues on saying, quote, "If it is a remake, that's a whole other kettle of three-eyed fish. I suppose making a single, cohesive, connected environment, that would be a natural these days. But the big focus would be improving the out-of-car gameplay. Hit and Run was our team's first platformer gameplay, so the camera and player mechanics were a bit rough around the edges. I'd love to have another crack at making Mario level smoothness in the platforming camera and animations so that the running parts felt as good as the driving. One thing I wouldn't change is the car physics. We were trying for a driver style kind of fun power sliding and it feels great today." Now, as a side note, in this interview, he does also mention they had started to work on early concepts for a Hit and Run sequel, but when EA bought the rights to the franchise, there wasn't too much they could do and they basically had to cease development because EA started working on the Simpsons game. Once again, it sounds like the game designer, McGinn, has a really good idea on what people like about it. I like his comments about if it is a remaster, not too much has to change, keep the style, just up frame rates and maybe beef up some of the textures. And I think he also gets, if it was reworked completely, some of the things they could add is making sure it's all smooth and fixing up some of the rough edges of the game just to make it that much better. And the last thing I want to talk about is a Reddit rumor, which as always take with a grain of salt because it is a rumor from an anonymous user. But this user posted a list of games that are going to be announced during the summer, allegedly. Some of the titles are Far Cry 6, Mad Max 2, Hitman 3, and at the bottom they say a Simpsons Hit and Run remaster is also in the works. Now, if this is true, based on the previous two interviews, it doesn't sound like the original team is involved, which once again isn't too surprising. Usually they have dedicated teams to remaster and remake games, and it's been a popular trend lately with Saints Row and the SpongeBob Rehydrated game, just to name a few. Also, with so many of the team members moving on to different studios and working on different projects, it also makes sense why EA wouldn't go seek all of them out just to work on a remaster. If this leak is true, a remaster is a great way to gauge public interest in the series. It could be a situation where a remaster is a cheap investment on EA's end, and depending on the results, could put more time and resources into a new title if the remaster sells well enough. I think it's also hard to say how much pull the Simpsons franchise still has. I know the series is still very popular and has seen a resurgence due to the availability of streaming on Disney+. 2007, The Simpsons movie came out, which is why The Simpsons Game sold so well. I think Hit and Run and Road Rage were really big hits, but it was also a time when licensed games themselves were very popular. So I think it is interesting. Maybe they are using the remaster to gauge interest in the series as a whole and to kind of see how much they can get away with in these current generations and with a whole new generation of fans. And for the most part, that's why we don't have a sequel, remaster, or a remade Simpsons Hit and Run game. EA bought the licensing rights and doesn't see a need to invest the time and money into development because of how much Tapped Out has made them. With the current rumors, it is possible we could see a remake in the future, but we will just have to wait and see. As always, make sure to like and share this video, subscribe for weekly gaming news, and I will see you guys in the next one.